Cheryl and Richard, and thank you so much for joining me on the show today to discuss your work, your experiences, and a group that we are yet to really dive into on this podcast. Would you both like to start by introducing yourselves to the listeners? Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl Bottenheimer. Most people know me as Cheryl Hope from any ex-member community. And I was born in a very tiny but mighty community in Canada called Maple Creek, Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. It's great to have you here today. And hi, Richard.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Richard Marsh. I was born in Cambridge, UK, and have subsequently lived in Jamaica and Canada. And how old am I? 51, something like that. I have just got, and can't help bragging about it, a new baby called Kiara, who is just 3 months old and makes us all very happy.
That's wonderful. Congratulations, Richard. 3 months old is
Yep.
all sorts of things, isn't it? 3 months old.
It is.
A precious time.
It is such a precious time, and everybody says it goes so fast, but it's a strange thing. Babies and time. But Jamaica, UK to Jamaica, that's a really strange change. Is there a reason for that move? Does it have anything to do with your experiences regarding the group we're talking about today?
Not exactly. My wife's Jamaican, so that's the connection.
I have heard that Jamaica, for people that visit, is a lot of it is secure compounds and things that you're not supposed to leave because you might be in danger, or is that just like a misconception?
No, that is true. It is a country that has a high level of violence in some areas. I mean, there's two Jamaicas. There's the kind of coastal holiday resorts with the hotels that are very cosmopolitan. You don't really get to meet the real, you don't get the flavor of the real Jamaica. But I was living with my fiance then in rural inland Jamaica, which is a third world country. It's very much subsistence. Yeah, I mean, a white person on their own without local connections might not be safe in those areas. They might be perceived as, a target for burglary. But if you're integrated into the communities there, you're safe enough. So yeah, that was a real experience.
And you're both based in Canada right now together?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Have you met in person? Has some of your work taken place face to face, or is it all virtual?
I haven't met Cheryl. No, not in person.
No, we're excited for the day.
Yeah.
That's going to be such a great day because you've both done so much work together at this point, and you're both in the same country. That's going to be a great day. Do you have any plans, like conventions or conferences and things?
Not anything solid at the moment. But yeah, I'm sure we will. We will meet up at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. We're all looking forward to meeting each other.
Yeah, that's gonna be a wonderful day. I hope that somebody catches that on film, because I think that would be like a historical moment, the two of you getting together after all this time and all this work you've done together. And Cheryl, you've always been in Canada, so your ties to the group that you were born and raised in, that's all within the country of Canada?
Yeah.
Would it be possible, Cheryl, for you to tell us a little bit about your personal history, and how you found yourself in the podcast space as well?
Well, I honestly, like, podcasting was never on my list of things to do. I hadn't even, never in a million years did I think I was going to be here. But sometimes life chooses us, right? And when you find things that are needing help and you've got a passion towards it and you want to make a difference, I put myself in a very vulnerable position, and every day we just keep working at it. So I was born and raised in the Exclusive Brethren, now known as the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. And I escaped it when I was 17 years old due to many different issues that were happening at the time. I honestly was very quiet in the ex-member community for like 30 years and came across a Breaking Brethren documentary. Actually, my husband found it and watched it. And then I came across an audio that was of David Wallace talking about his incidences that he had with being told to capture Richard Marsh. And so it was really took me into this rabbit hole. And I guess I've always looked for a landing pad that was strong enough to hold what I needed to come forward with if I needed to come forward with it. And I started doing a lot of digging. I was very particular who I was reaching out to, only because it was such a sensitive subject. And I also know how ruthless the PBCC can be. And so it was also my safety. And I had come across somebody who lived in the same town that I had and had an incident with the same perpetrator as me just 4 years ago. And the place that she worked at was the same place that my brother had worked at, who's still in there. I'm the only one out of my family. And I knew he had daughters. And so I kind of got their ages of what they would be at. And I knew that they were very much at the age where they could have got placed in that environment. And I was like, hell no, absolutely. Cheryl, this isn't about really you anymore. This is about you putting those big girl panties on and stepping into a very vulnerable position, telling your story, alerting the community of Maple Creek. I had went and did a police report. And honestly, I did it all for my nieces. I mean, I've been in therapy for years and years and years and years. Obviously, this was a sensitive subject that once the documentary came out and Richard Marsh's story had come out, I was really in the throes of what had happened to me in my sexual abuse stuff. And I hadn't really gotten deep into it with my therapy. Most of it was the power, the course of control, the stuff that happened with our family alone. And so I really got into that at the same time I had started this podcast. So I had a lot of pots on the stove, so to speak. But I'm a very expressive, explosive, passionate woman, as Richard can attest to. So it worked in my favor that I was in this healing of this. At the same time, it allowed me to fuel the change that needed to happen. So if anybody watches any of my podcasts, I am a mess on them. I am not necessarily this, professional piece of art that is groomed. I am just authentically the chaotic mess that I am. And it has just opened up so many doors for people inside to come forward. My emails, my phone, my Instagram, Twitter, everything is always going. Every time we put out a podcast, we try and put out 2 podcasts a week. We just hired on a UK team. We're working on getting together an Australia and New Zealand team. It is heart-wrenching, but at the same time, it is so needed. It's so needed, especially in this community of the Exclusive Brethren and the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. It's just needed. It's gone on. I had a phone call come to me yesterday from somebody inside and just in tears and thanking me. He said, this is so overdue. This is so overdue. Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible, Cheryl. And the name of your podcast is Get a Life.
Yeah.
We've been posting episodes when they get released on the r/cultpodcast subreddit. So anybody that has an interest in cult podcasts, you can find a whole host of shows over there, including Get a Life. And we will make sure that we include the links in the episode description to all of the places people can find that show as well. And you happened to come across information about Richard at the same time that you were coming forward with your own story. And now Richard is here with us having this conversation, and you're both doing all of this work together. So Richard, can you please give us a brief history on the PBCC, how it started, who started it, how it changed, and where your own personal history ties into that timeline?
Sure. It started in the 1830s, where there was almost a global burst of religious activity, particularly in English-speaking countries. So it's very much contemporary with Jehovah's Witnesses, started at the same time from the same kind of movement, and Seventh-day Adventists, and they were all kind of variations on a theme. Basically, people sort of took up the Bible and started reading their own ideas into it, or different ideas from the mainstream churches, and building a following. So the guy who's mostly associated with the founding of the Brethren is a guy called John Nelson Darby. He didn't actually start it, but he became the most influential leader. The one thing he really contributed to the world, if that's the contributed is the word, is the idea of the rapture, which is this whole kind of end times apocalyptic idea that all the believers are going to magically levitate up into heaven, and then the world's going to be destroyed with lots of fireworks. He was the guy who kind of promoted that idea heavily, and there are now millions and millions of people around the globe who believe in the rapture, but there's only 55,000 exclusive brethren. So that one idea got a lot more legs than the rest of his philosophy. So the irony is, it started out actually as an anti-cult movement. It started out with Darby and some of his friends saying it's not right that Christianity is split up into all these little sects. You know, there's Presbyterians and Methodists and Catholics. So they kind of set up a table where any Christian could come and join them in worship in a simple communion ceremony with bread and wine. And there was no, it was don't ask, don't tell in terms of what else you happen to believe. As long as you were a Christian, you could join them. It was this wonderful, it was a utopia idea, and it was genuinely a good idea. But within Darby's lifetime, it had gone to the opposite extreme. They became more and more fussy about membership requirements. This one and that one was turned away, and then it got down to very obscure and fine points of doctrine, and eventually it became the most sort of cultic cult of all, the most exclusive of any sect in Christianity. And you had to sign up to, there was a whole list of doctrines and rules. It just became extremely conservative. It was all relatively harmless and relatively conventional right through till right through the 1960s. It had always tended to focus around one leader. They don't have any formal hierarchy. They just have one leading figure, which is always dangerous. And how it's like a dictatorship. I mean, dictatorships can be good if you have a good dictator. If he's a really good guy, he can use his dictatorial powers for good. But of course, it doesn't happen because power corrupts. In 1960, a guy called James Taylor Jr. took over this very boring, very conventional, very introverted Christian sect, which was, mostly just plain Protestantism, and he completely radicalized it. Not, I think, exactly intentionally. That the problem was he was an alcoholic and a womanizer, and as the 60s proceeded, his behavior became more and more eccentric, and he became more and more publicly lewd and disgusting and drunk. But because the brethren were so fixated on the idea that their leader was infallible, then of course the brethren adjusted their religious morals to accommodate this guy. So they said, it's okay to grope women and it's okay to get drunk. And of course it provoked a split. I mean, a lot of the decent, sensible people who weren't quite so brainwashed left. I think, 6,000 to 10,000 brethren left the movement, or the exclusive wing of the movement in that period. And what it left was this kind of rump of people who were, by definition, the most gullible 75%.
Or the most, up for the lifestyle of drinking and harassing women.
Well, yeah, it wasn't exactly. It was more the people. You see, they all went in for the drinking, but the womanizing was only for the leader. No one else was allowed to do that.
Of
So
course,
they didn't really get a lot of fun out of it, other than, the kind of. But I expect they enjoyed watching the old boy in action. But they didn't get to partake of these benefits to any degree. So I think it was really the most gullible ones who were left, the ones who, were stuck on this idea that this was the only place. I mean, the problem with the brethren, or the problem with trying to leave the brethren, is that you're brainwashed from birth to believe that if these are the only people going to heaven, these are God's chosen people, and if you leave, you're going to go to hell. And of course, that's a great deterrent to leaving. I mean, why would you risk it? Even if you had some doubts, you're not going to take that chance. I mean, it's like an insurance policy: stay in here and you will get to heaven. The other huge deterrent to leaving is their social isolation policy, which is that if someone leaves, then they are shunned and cut off. You can't talk to them, you can't eat with them. And so, of course, leaving doesn't just mean changing your belief or abandoning your religion. It also means losing your wife, your children, your parents, and every single person you ever knew. So, a lot of people, I suspect, at the time of that 1960s crisis, a lot of people who actually stayed in their minds, they knew it was wrong, but they weren't prepared for the sacrifice of, losing everything, losing their family and their friends. So that kind of came to a head in 1970 when James Taylor Jr. went up to Aberdeen in Scotland and was caught in bed with someone else's wife. And, that kind of provoked a final exodus of a lot of people. And then the guy died. He died later in 1970. And since then, they've had a succession of further leaders. There was James Symington from 1970 to 86. He was a pig farmer out of North Dakota. Then there was John Hales, who was an Australian businessman, and then it's been his son, Bruce Hales, also an Australian businessman. And they're all regarded as sort of manifestations of the Holy Spirit. They're regarded as divine. The brethren believe that Jesus actually personally, in a real body, not just spiritually, comes down and talks to them and tells them what to say. And they just play this card for all it's worth. So where I came into it, I was born in 71, so just after this big Aberdeen split. My parents were very caring, but they were also very deeply indoctrinated. So you kind of grew up in this very religious atmosphere. You weren't allowed to bring, we went to normal schools. This was before brethren had their own schools, so at least we got to a regular school. But you had to sit out of anything to do with Christmas. You had to sit out of religious assemblies. You had to sit out of sex education. You weren't allowed to bring your friends home from school. So you were always the odd one out. And that got a whole lot more difficult when you got to high school, secondary school, because, kids are teenagers and they can be cruel, and there was all the bullying and everything that goes along, because we didn't have radio or television. So most of the time we didn't know what the other kids were talking about. That's what they talk about, what was on TV last night, you just didn't know. So it was a tough, although my parents are very kind and they were quite well off, didn't lack for anything, it was still a rough upbringing. Nothing compared to what Cheryl experienced with sexual abuse, but it's tough growing up in a cult when you're different from all your peers. So I was a good believing Plymouth brother, sucked it all up, didn't question it. Finally came to a crunch in 2015, I mean, there were all sorts of adventures in between, but the real crunch point was when I discovered that the Brethren business that I was working for was perpetrating a really nasty and dangerous fraud on the National Health Service. And I was gobsmacked, because up to that point, as far as I was aware, to my belief, Brethren, for all their faults, were normally very honest, and there was a big emphasis on being righteous in business and paying your taxes and not misdescribing things in the advertising sense. And they were regarded as, for all their unpleasant excommunication activities, they were regarded as good citizens. And to find that this business was doing this very blatant, very ugly fraud, and not only that, it was a business. I mean, I was in the UK at the time, but the Australian half of the business was actually run by members of the Hales family, the sons of Bruce Hales, who's the universal leader. It's like kind of finding that the Pope is running a brothel on the side. It's that kind of cognitive dissonance. And it gave me this real dilemma, because I knew if I spoke out, I'd be excommunicated, because Brethren like to keep everything, you do not ever report other Brethren to the police or to the authorities, regardless of how serious the crime is. It's all dealt with internally. I knew perfectly well if I just reported this to the Brethren and not to the authorities, that it would just provoke a huge cover-up. So, but by that time, I was really disillusioned with the whole thing, and this was the last straw. So I did a report, a multi-page report on the whole thing. I gathered all the documentation evidence I could, sent it to the National Health Service and the Health and Safety Executive and everyone I could think of, and also to the kind of leading Brethren in my locality. And sure enough, they were on the doorstep before I'd even got home, frothing at the mouth, absolutely wild with me. And yeah, I mean, it's a long story, but yeah, eventually I was gone. They just made life too incredibly unpleasant. And what happened subsequently to that is I set up a website, exposing all this fraud. I also found other Brethren businesses engaged in some very massive fraudulent activity. And I also started calling out the whole Hales family, what we now know as a crime syndicate, and also calling out Brethren's misbehavior, their cruel excommunication. So I kind of let them have it with both barrels. I didn't have anything to lose at that point. I hadn't any money. What were they going to do? And it resulted in them pursuing me around the globe with lawyers and private investigators and private investigators who weren't actually private investigators. A whole amazing saga where they were desperately trying to find me. I've been arrested. They managed to get me arrested, I think 3 times in total. They've had at least 3 different private investigators trying to find me. It's a saga. So they were hunting me in England, and I went to Jamaica. I don't know if they ever managed to find me in Jamaica, but as soon as I was back in England, they were on my case again. Then I came to Canada, and then I found my wife was being stalked in Canada. They were following her home from work. And then we managed to trick. We found out what who the private investigator was that was looking for me, and we actually managed to trick the guy. He had contacted a friend of mine to see if, my friend would rat me out and tell me where he is. So my friend and I kind of put our heads together, and my friend tells the investigator that no, he wasn't prepared to help, but he had a friend who was really good at computer hacking, and maybe his friend could hack into Richard's emails to find out his location. Anyway, we then set up this sort of anonymous email account, contact the private investigator pretending to be a computer hacker, and offered to get emails from my account. I mean, he didn't realize he was actually talking to the guy he was looking for. So yeah, we sent him, I would write emails actually on my genuine email account, making out I was in Scotland while I was actually in Canada. And we would sell these to the guy. We actually took, I don't know, $6,000 off this guy, me
my
just selling
gosh.
him my own emails. So, you know, some of it's been fun. It hasn't all been bad. Anyway, eventually obviously the brethren realized that their PI was being conned, and it all went quiet, and we kind of waited to see what would happen next. The next thing that happened is we get a call from this guy, David Wallace. David Wallace isn't even a private investigator. He's a kind of a political operative. He's the sort of guy who does very nasty deals to try and, you know, dig dirt on politicians or set people up to bring them down in the sort of very murky political world. This guy had been hired by the brethren to find me. I mean, he's much more expensive than a private investigator. This guy is top notch. He's like a real top notch underworld operative, with all sorts of connection to Russia and organized crime and you name it. And this guy had been paid enormous sums of money to find me. And I mean, David Wallace, in spite of his murky field of operations, he's not a violent guy. As he says, he doesn't do wet jobs. And he realized that, I mean, he had been hired on the premise that they wanted to find Richard to serve legal papers on him. But then when he pressed them on this point, they couldn't produce the legal papers. And they said, well, no, actually, we just want you to hold the guy and we're going to take his hard drive. And they've got a team to call in. They said, look, when you found him, just call us and we'll bring in a team. Now, what that team was going to do to me, whether it was murder or kidnap or whether they just wanted to beat me up, I don't know. But anyway, I recorded this call from David Wallace. I mean, it's one thing you learn when you're on the run is always have a recorder on your phone. And we published it on the ex-brethren community. We published it on YouTube, and David Wallace was absolutely horrified. He calls me up and says, look, I'm trying to help you out, and now I've got people hunting me because they realize I've turned the table on them. But
what is happening?
To the guy's credit, he kind of came round to my side, and he said, well, look, I'm tired of doing all this dirty work. I'm going to throw my lot in with you. I've got a whole load of incredibly interesting stories about all these politicians I've worked for. I think it's time for me to retire and write the book. But he's not a very organized. I mean, he's not a computer literate sort of guy. Everything's done on phone. And he had this enormous archive of 3 or 4 years of all his emails, all his texts, all his Twitter messages, his Facebook messages, enormous archive of stuff. About 20% of it related to the brethren. The rest of it related to quite prominent politicians in Alberta and Ontario. And he said, well, you know, if you want this, sort through it. He sent me the whole lot. It was a huge file. It nearly crashed my computer. I just happened to be off work for a few weeks. And so I went through it all. I turned it all into PDFs, put it all in order. And it was about 6,500 pages. And my plan was that in Canada, the brethren are not at all well known because they're a fairly small proportion of the population. But I thought if I can sort of launch this whole scandalous pack of papers. I mean, you've heard of the sort of the Paradise Papers and these kind of leaks you get from tropical countries, the Panama Papers. So that if I could launch it like that, it'll be kind of like a Trojan horse. Everyone will read it because it's got all this scandal about well-known politicians, and they'll get to learn about these nasty Plymouth Brethren Christian church as well. So put it all together, sent it to a bunch of journalists, and it's generated a whole series of newspaper articles and podcasts, and it's still going. I mean, I still haven't publicly released the whole lot. So yeah, that leaves out an enormous amount of stuff, but basically that's where I am now. I'm now writing my own autobiography, which there's suddenly a demand for.
Yeah,
And
I can imagine.
yeah. And so one of the journalists I sent this to produced actually it was before I'd actually put together all David Wallace's papers, but when I'd launched just the recording of his phone call to me, that attracted the attention of a documentary producer who produced the Breaking Brethren documentary, which gave the whole thing a lot higher profile in Canada. Then we were contacted by a guy called James DeFiore, who's a podcaster who was kind of scouting around for new, it only started fairly recently. It was scouting around for new subjects to get into. And he latched onto this. And then Cheryl saw his podcast and she saw Breaking Brethren. So she contacted me and she contacted James. And, we kind of realized that podcasting was the medium for this stuff. And it's just been incredible. I mean, for a very, very niche subject, X-exclusive brethren is a very, very small subject, but yeah, we get, average around 1,000 views for each podcast. And the great thing is for us, the thing that we're really excited about is a lot of those views are from people inside the church. And that's the audience that I'm really, really excited about reaching out to, because the only way you can escape, the bars of the cage are not physical, they're in the heads of the members. And the only way you can break them is to get inside their heads yourself and, break those delusions that they're trapped in. So this is how we do it.
You say everything so casually, and I am in absolute shock. And Cheryl is still like laughing and reacting to things that you're saying. So even though she must have heard this story so many times, it's wild. It sounds like an episode of 24.
But you cannot make this shit up. You just can't.
It's wild, and we're laughing, but it must have been at times quite scary to experience gang stalking in that way, and fair gaming in the way that you've been exposed to it. And they want your hard drive. They don't want the hard drive to find dirt on you. They want your hard drive because you've got things on them, surely.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I'm still sitting on all David. Some of the emails from David Wallace, like the Brethren emails I've published, but the vast majority of it I'm still enjoying sitting on, partly because I want to kind of release them along with my book, and partly because, there's sort of documentary and so on enterprises. But it's a very nice position to be in when you're just sort of one guy on your own up against a multi-billion-dollar corporation, to be sitting on a pile of dirt. It's a really comfortable pile of dirt because, there's nothing they can do about it. They're scared of me.
They've tried a lot of things, and
Yeah.
it's actually worked out in your favor. The person they sent after you to locate your hard drive was the person whose hard drive they probably should have been thinking about trying to do something with, and now you have all of that stuff. That is just such a wild story. And so many of the things that you've said remind me of Scientology. They remind me of things that people that have left Scientology have experienced. And when you said that the PBCC is a niche area, it certainly is, but cults is not. And so much of what you've said about the shunning processes and the gang stalking, and people showing up on your doorstep, it's so akin to Jehovah's Witnesses and many other destructive religious groups that exist. So it might be focusing on one religious group that has, around 55,000 people around the world who all seem to have been after you at one point. It's still helping us to connect the dots between other destructive practices. So it's amazing. And the fact that there are individuals in this group that are listening and accessing the show that you're both doing together is another wonderful thing. And I can definitely see this being made into some kind of documentary. The stuff about the Plymouth Brethren itself is is wild on its own. And then your story, Richard, is just like something out of an actual like Hollywood action film. That's some wild stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not the only one. I mean, there are other leavers who have been through very, very similar experience with the private investigators and being arrested on all kinds of false charges. Some of them are not quite ready to speak out yet. I mean, that's really the tipping point. I mean, when you get this kind of aggression, you go two ways. It's fight or flight. You either go big or you go home. So, you know, I went big.
Cheryl, something that you mentioned in your introduction was that you recognized that the experiences that you had growing up were most likely experiences that your young nieces would be going through after you had managed to distance yourself from the group. Did you have sort of a moment of realizing that it was the entire PBCC itself that was corrupt and not just the small group that you were associated with? Or was it only when you moved away that you realized the whole thing seems to be problematic?
I mean, I knew Maple Creek was horrible, absolutely horrible. I didn't realize, I mean, when you're sexually abused from a very, very young age, like I try and explain this to people because they get so overwhelmed with like, well, my story's not like yours. And I'm like, yeah, but you have to understand that I was very young. And so it's all I knew, right? Whereas somebody who's like 8 or 9 and all of a sudden it happens to it, right? But I honestly, you don't think that it might have happened to somebody else, right? And so when all these stories started landing on my lap, especially the specific one, I can't even tell you, it shattered my world inside me to think that if I didn't come forward, that my one thing that I didn't want was my niece showing up on my doorstep with my perpetrator's body on her. And I hadn't did anything to do with it. I didn't say anything, right? So I knew that this was an opportunity. I really realized, holy crap, like this is much bigger than what you thought it was, Cheryl. And it's time, it was just time. It was time to literally not be afraid anymore and just step up and do it for somebody that I'll probably never get to meet, right? But it was just, there was no way I was going to have that somebody show up on my doorstep with my perpetrators, the same story on them, and I could have done something about it. And, you know, I actually have had a report come to, like, I know what I did worked, right? So there was an incident that has happened that, I mean, I can't go into it here, but it literally, why I came forward worked. And I mean, I don't know how long it will work for, but I know of 8 incidents where it got diverted.
Were you surprised to learn that this type of abuse was perpetuated throughout the Plymouth Brethren internationally?
Oh, so shocked. Yeah, absolutely. It's just, and I honestly have to say, like, I haven't recovered from that. Like I am in the throes of therapy while I'm doing this, because I'm the type of person where I wear my heart on my sleeve. And when you listen to someone's story, it's like you're living it, right? Like it's when you just have that kind of care and compassion for other human beings, right? It's hard to have separation. And it's heart-wrenching, absolutely freaking heart-wrenching to know that there are people still enduring horrible, horrible sexual abuse in there. And our policing system, all the systems that we have do not protect this kind of stuff. Like I had my lead investigator when I had an incident of somebody come forward who was in there, and he said, well, just can you tell that person, like we can get a hold of social services. And I said that's not how, like you are not understanding what I came out of, because there is no way I could call up social services and say, hey, go to this house. I said that 15-year-old would literally look at that social services and be like, oh no, it never happened to me. And then she go get that door closes and her life is torn apart. Like it's I just really believe we do not have the systems in place to attend to any of this kind of abuse in any of these cults. We just don't. And I'm finding through doing these podcasts that the biggest landing pad or platform is to have people coming forward telling their stories, because it sets off this domino. Then this next person listens to enough of them and says, I'm ready to come forward and tell my story. And then it goes and it goes and it goes and it goes to the point where there's so many people standing up telling their story that eventually something has to change somewhere. And that's what I hope for. That's what I bank on. I believe that truth will always, always persevere. It will always persevere. And I believe that's why Richard is still standing. I believe that's why David Wallace decided to do what he did. Because when you stand up and you get rid of that fear and you stand up in your own truth and speak from that place, it cannot be washed away. It just can't be. It's solid.
Gosh, you two are like inspirational. It's amazing to hear you speak that way, Cheryl. And I agree with you that there has to be change, especially some type of regulation or oversight around religions that are given the privileges of protection, basically protection of freedom of religion and tax exemption and all of the nice things that religious groups get to have, with also no real meddling from outside institutions.
It's like they all need to be grounded, right? All the religions need to be grounded, and somebody needs to be placed inside each one at every moment to be able to govern it, because we can bring in all these laws as much as we want, right? We can bring them all in. The thing is, from what I know, from what I lived, and everything that's happened in the PBCC in the last 10 years, I mean, Richard can attest this, where there was letters written out and they changed their meaning for that letter for when someone came to it, and then went back to what they were doing before. So it's laws are not like, there's got to be some way that governs the laws that are put in. Shunning needs to go. It's got to be the first thing that has to go. That rule has to be taken out, but then there's got to be something that governs that, so that it's not brainwashed in another way. Because to do with the PBCC, they can, I mean, you listen to any or read the articles and they have all of these responses, right? And it's all lies. It's absolute all lies. They could say, oh, it's the family's choice to have contact, but it is drilled in you that you don't do that.
Yeah. And I imagine you're treated very differently at congregations and gatherings if you stick to the law, but not the religious teachings or expectations.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think the way that we are able to tackle this on all the fronts of all these different cults, right, is helping people have the courage to stand up, trying to help them release that fear of what's been indoctrinated into them, right? Because when you gain your own power and you can stand up and move forward, all of a sudden the army out here of truth starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there's no choice but to have change happen. And accountability comes from the people, not from the law.
55,000 people, it's not a significant number in terms of other religious groups that are also labeled as cultic groups themselves. I've heard you talk, Richard, about how the Plymouth Brethren is not traditional in the sense that there's no evangelizing, there's no door-to-door recruitment, there's no deployment of members to ramp up the numbers. So I wondered if you could just talk the listeners through how it is that the Plymouth Brethren exists in the way that it does today.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because that's probably the one thing that distinguishes them from, I mean, most people know Jehovah's Witnesses quite well. They have this shunning practice. They have rather similar meeting halls and rather similar doctrines. But the thing about Jehovah's Witnesses, what they're notorious for is going and knocking on people's doors. They put a massive amount of effort into recruitment. And one of the reasons of that is that they bleed heavily. They lose a lot of members all the time. Now, Plymouth Brethren go the other way. They don't recruit at all. it's all through what I would crudely call captive breeding program. I mean, everyone is born into it. Like 99, probably at least 99% of current members were actually born into the church to parents who are in the church. We're getting on to like 7th, 8th generation now.
Oh.
And you know, I did some very rough statistics. I reckon the Brethren lose about 1% of their members each year to people actually either being kicked out or deciding to leave the religion. So let's say you're in a typical congregation of about 100 people. In 10 years, you might have lost 10 people, but at the same time, you would have gained 30 or 40 people just by, you know, babies coming along, in excess of the deaths. Brethren, contraception is prohibited, large families are encouraged, getting married very young is encouraged. They breed like rabbits. And that's where they all come from.
Do you know when that, well, I mean, you spoke about the exclusive part of the exclusive brethren at the start of our conversation, in terms of everybody was allowed to come, and then actually only you can come and only you can come.
Yeah.
Is that when this started, during that period of the Great Awakening, or did the exclusivity kind of kick in terms of actually we're just going to be lineage based later down the line?
Yeah, later down the line. I mean, probably by the turn of the century, like 1900, you would have been encouraged to marry other Brethren members, like marrying a Presbyterian would have been frowned on. But it was really, but people were continuing to join the movement right through the 30s, 40s, 50s, because when it got radicalized into the 60s with all this weird sex stuff and hundreds and hundreds of crazy rules. I mean, you weren't allowed cats and dogs. Everyone had their cats and dogs euthanized, and wacko rules. Of course, suddenly no one was going to join the thing. And it's the same today. It's so extreme and so crazy that no one would join it. Why the hell would you join it? And so, by definition, then they had to breed their own members.
With some groups that practice polygamy, with groups that have forced polygamy and plural marriage, there's a chance that incest becomes a part of the realm. Is that something that can happen within the Plymouth Brethren, do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, they have it. I mean, marrying cousins was allowed until maybe the 60s, and they had some problems with that, with children being
My
born with birth
perpetrator was
defects
married
and
to
so
his
on.
first cousin.
Yeah, but then then they kind of then they went to the opposite extreme and said you can't marry anyone that you're related to, even even if it's 10 generations back. And so now increasingly they've got this problem that for a young man, young woman growing up in the Brethren, who are they going to marry? So they actually have to keep careful genealogies to make sure that they're not, getting inbred.
Oh, John, you're going to have to travel across the other side of the world because there's a person that you can marry that's not related to you. It's the only one in your age group, but she's over it on the other side of the planet.
That's exactly what happened. I mean, particularly in South Africa, the Brethren in South Africa, there were about 1,000 or 2,000 Brethren there. They became so inbred, or they weren't actually inbred, but they became so interrelated that there was literally no one they could marry. And so they would actually send special tours. They'd send a sort of a plane load of young brothers from around the world to go down there and pick a chick. My cousin married one of these sort of South African girls on one of those trips.
It's just, this is the part where it feels like people are not, explicitly, people are not seen as individuals. They are just seen as property.
Yes.
Just the function of this person or these people is to continue the religion itself. And it's hard to I don't know how. Oh, it's just callous. It feels very callous. It feels like, oh,
And
actually,
they cover it up so well, right? Like they cover it up so well. And if you were to sit here and have them listen to it, be like, oh, well, that's not what it is. And people who are very brainwashed. But when you get out of it and you look at this through black and white, be like, let's lay this on the table and let's look at this in black and white. It's absolutely what it is. That all those women are just looked as property. And I mean, we've had guests on that will be like, smile across the meeting room. And it's like, okay, yeah. And then ask later on, be like, let's get married. Right. Like and that's why I think we used to, growing up, we always got teased about these 3-day meetings that would come into Maple Creek. It's a very small town. And so all these chartered buses would come in with flocks and flocks and flocks of brethren. And we used to get bugged all the time that it was our breeding time. And honestly, it was, because that's when men and women got hooked up. And I mean, hooked up in the sense that it was like you made eye contact and be like, oh yeah, the man would be like, I want that. And then would have to go to the leader later on and be like, this is who I want to marry, and get permission. I mean, there was a guest on we had who went to Bruce Hales, asked permission to marry this girl. He didn't even ask the girl yet.
Yeah. ask Bruce Hales first. Yeah.
I imagine in some spaces there might be an expectation that the woman would never have to be asked. If the leader gives the blessing, then I suppose in some cases that's signed and sealed.
Oh yeah, that would be the presumption. I mean, if the leader approves the match and you turn it down, no one else is going to take you, because obviously, you couldn't imply that he would make a mistake. I mean, the thing that was sad about it and dangerous about it is, firstly, there was huge pressure to get married, particularly brothers, not so much for sisters, brothers. You had to get married. And you were if you weren't married by 23 or 24, there was something wrong with you. But the other thing is, there was no courtship allowed. So, I mean, when I got married, I married in the Brethren, I was 20, my ex-wife was 19. I had literally spoken to her for 5 minutes before I'd proposed by letter, and it was all approved and it was all signed and sealed. 5 minutes conversation.
That feels like the Unification Church, doesn't it? Like, and it also feels a lot like KwaZulu-Ubuntu in South Africa as well. The extremely abusive Christian mission that we've talked about on the show before. And I wonder then, when you talk about exclusivity and you think about South Africa, KwaZulu-Ubuntu, they claim not to be divisive in terms of skin color, but there has never been an interracial marriage within KSB. And I wonder if that is similar with the PBCC as well, even though they have chapters, branches, sects in South Africa. Is it common, or is it almost unheard of for interracial marriages to take place?
Interracial marriage is banned. You can't have interracial marriage. It's kind of an apartheid thing. I mean, nearly all, 95% of brethren are white Caucasians. There were about 1,000 dark-skinned brethren in the Caribbean, and they've got this kind of separate but equal status. Yeah, they'll worship together and they'll eat in each other's houses, but they can't intermarry, which is of course racism. If you question them about it, they quote a scripture which says, love does not behave in an unseemly manner. That's their justification for it. And it's like all their things. They've always got a scripture for everything. What the actual connection is between the scripture they quote and the question you ask is pretty woolly. But there's an assumption there that it's obvious or self-evident that it's unseemly for a black person and a white person to marry.
You're expected to just go, oh yeah, okay. Like it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
gosh.
by marrying a Jamaican woman, it was a bit of rebellion. I think there was a little bit of forbidden fruit appeal there.
So in terms of marginalized community groups that we often see oppressed in high demand religious groups, like women, people that are not white, are we now getting into the territory of looking at the LGBTQIA plus community and just understanding out of the gate that this is not something that has any kind of acceptance within the Plymouth Brethren?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, when I was in the Brethren, living in Canada in 2006, that was when the kind of gay marriage was legalized in Canada, and it was very controversial. It was all going through Parliament, and the Brethren ran a massive campaign bombarding all the members of Parliament with letters and faxes and every phone calls and visits. Everyone had to write letters to MPs, and you write one in your own name, and then you'd write one using your middle name, and then you'd write one using your initials, and then you'd write one using your mother's name. And out of there were only about 10,000 Brethren in Canada, but I calculated they actually produced more than 1 million letters that flooded into the office of every MP in the country to kind of create the impression there was this massive grassroots movement against gay marriage. And, we had these instructions came to us, from the Brethren Central Committee saying, if gay marriage is passed in Canada, the Brethren will all have to leave the country, and the country will be taken over by gay people, and it'll be a moral disaster, and, a whole load of bullshit and scaremongering. And they go over this incredibly dishonest way of promoting their ideas. And bizarrely, at the same time, they don't vote. But they will put immense amounts of time and money into lobbying politicians to promote their particular
whose
views.
money as well.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. So something that I wanted to ask you about, Cheryl, I was listening to you both talk on Sean Atwood's podcast, and something that stood out to me in what you said was about the difficulties that you both experienced in school in terms of isolation and alienation from being pulled out of classes. Cheryl, you talked about being othered just from the way that you were expected to dress. So there's a conversation I think that we should have around if you could both shed some light on restrictions in terms of dietary restrictions, clothing, relationships, and leisure time. But Cheryl, you mentioned that you had a Jehovah's Witness friend in school, and I wondered if this was a default friendship that came out of both not being able to take part in Christmas activities and things like that.
Yeah, so when in school they hand out like the Halloween papers to color and the Easter papers, well, she couldn't do them either. And so we bonded a friendship over the same thing, right? We're not being able to do what she couldn't do. Yeah, but most definitely it was bonded over that. But yeah, we had to, couldn't cut your hair, right? You don't wear makeup. There was supposed to be a bow in your hair all the time, although I didn't wear that. No bangs, no, you had to wear skirts. I mean, I challenged that a lot. I mean, most of my priesthood visits, if the skirt crept above the knee, then, I knew I would probably most likely get a priesthood visit that week, and I did. But yeah, I mean, I had a paper route. I had to ride a bike doing a paper route in a skirt, right? I mean, if anybody has ridden a bike in a skirt, and I mean, my skirts were knee length, right? I mean, it's just humiliating, absolutely humiliating.
When you go to services, are women expected to dress in a certain way to symbolize their status within the PBCC?
Yeah, so hierarchy wise within the women, no, you wouldn't recognize that female is higher up in the hierarchy than the other one, right? But where you would notice it is where when you had to be assigned to someone else's house for supper or for breaks in between, right? So most often you just wouldn't get invited to people who are higher up on the hierarchy, right? That wouldn't happen, right? And if it did, I mean, it was very awkward. But just to give the listeners to understanding, when you go to a church service, all the females with the children sit at the back, right? And they don't have access to speaking. They are just there to look pretty, and all the men sit in the front rows, and those rows go by hierarchy. So the people that are the highest up get the front row. Then there's the second row and the third row. My dad always sat in the last row. I remember one time he had moved up to the second, and then, it was months later, he moved back to the third, right? So definitely the hierarchy is shown very much inside the church services with the men. I have never met such a catty, judgmental group of human beings now that I've been out for 30 years than what was inside there. And I guess that's my biggest thing that I would love to, it's just, that would be my biggest plea to Bruce Hales, is that he has no idea that the judgmental group that he is creating, they are nowhere near walking around with their hearts on their sleeves, having compassion, being able to hold open their arms for anybody or anyone, right? It's sad. It's sad. I mean, that's not saying that there's very kind people in there. My parents are very kind people, but growing up, it's just like the kids, all the kids are just, they're just so catty. They're just so cliquey. They're just so judgmental. And I mean, I've talked with plenty of principals and teachers of One School Global, which is their school system. And the teachers, they all have the same story, I had one principal that had brought food for people who were on the bottom of the hierarchy, and how much taunting and bullying that goes on between the kids at school, between the different of the hierarchies. I mean, obviously, if you were ever to go and have a journalist go to the people inside there, they would deny all of this, right? They had, in one of their most recent Sydney seminars, they brought an anti-bullying program to their schools since we've publicized all of this, right? And I don't see how they can neutralize that system inside there when they have such a bullying hierarchy up top, right? Because kids just do what they see that's happening.
Yeah,
right?
it's perpetuated and learned intergenerationally, I guess. It's almost like the teachings and the indoctrination itself. It's something that's taught, that's learned, and then as the years go on, it just continues on in the same way that the self-sealing system has continued on. So without this type of work that you're both doing, I don't know how else you break that, how else you change that. And you've mentioned there that the PBCC have their own schooling, so you both experienced public school, which came with its own difficulties, and now are they homeschooling programs, or are they actual buildings that exist where PBCC children go and attend? And is there standard curriculum?
I'll let you answer this, Richard.
Yeah, no, it's very strange, because people assume that when you say the Brethren have their own schools, that they're religious schools, but in fact they're not. The curriculum is limited. It's based on the national curriculum of whatever jurisdiction they're in, except that they kind of trim out bits about evolution and sex education and so on. The whole and the other thing is, there's a very heavy emphasis on business studies, particularly when you get to the senior years. It's a very limited curriculum. It's all about accounting and business studies and literacy and numeracy. Very little scope for doing music or sport or history or geography, because the Brethren has become very, very highly commercialized, and the schools feed into that. They basically produce ideal recruits for the Brethren's business enterprise. The whole point and essence and reason for the Brethren to have their own schools, it's purely to maintain the isolation. It's not from a curriculum point of view. It's just so that their kids don't get contaminated by non-Brethren kids and don't get exposed to ideas and critical thinking that would challenge the doctrines that they've worked so hard to brainwash into the poor kids. And they they get reasonable results in terms of examination results. I mean, the kids are put under immense amount of pressure to succeed at school, lot of pressure, far too much pressure in many cases, but university is banned, so none of them go on to higher education. They can't go to university. Some of them will do home study type university level courses, or the brethren have their own sort of in-house business courses, which they claim are university level but aren't actually. But all these kids are, I mean, to start with, the girls aren't really expected to have a career at all. They're breeding stock. And the boys are just, again, they don't have a career choice. When they leave school, they are just plugged into one of the local brethren businesses. You're not allowed to work for non-brethren. So living in the brethren, every aspect of your life is controlled. I mean, imagine you're a parent with teenage children. You will be working for a brethren company. Your children go to a brethren school. The school trustees, all the people who control the school are brethren. If your child misbehaves at school, you'll be facing up to the brethren trustee board. When your child leaves school, they will work for another brethren business. So right from the moment you wake up in the morning to the last thing at night, every single aspect of your life is controlled by the same small group of people who are the same people you see at church every day. It's
like the Truman
cabin
Show.
Yeah, it's cabin fever. It's terribly, if you're successful and everyone likes you, yeah, it's great. But if you're at the bottom of the totem pole, I always compare it to chicken pecking order. There's always a pecking order in every congregation. If you're at the bottom, everyone is beating down on you the whole time.
In terms of this NHS corruption business that you found out about, which was the tipping point for you to leave, this is an example of one of those exclusive brethren companies that were able to get an NHS contract somehow. Do you know the ins and outs of this? And also, then, does that mean that there is some ties to government or politicians? And how is it that the exclusive brethren of all people are able to get these NHS contracts?
Yeah, well, there's two stages to that, because when I was in there, the company, I mean, the thing I uncovered was sort of proceeding from about 2010 onwards. So it preceded the whole kind of COVID PPE thing by a long period. I mean, the way they got it was purely through extremely dishonest and deceptive advertising and pseudoscience, downright lies and deception. A whole bag of tricks, but it was all misrepresentation. It wasn't actually done by using political influence. Now, when the COVID came along, the brethren scooped, I think in the UK, 2.3 billion pounds worth of those contracts. Now, that was done by all these political contacts.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the same company that I fell out with about their fraud back in 2015, they got one of the biggest contracts when the COVID came along.
How is that possible? Especially when you explain exactly what it was that they were doing so wrong in 2015 in the first place. And then we have a pandemic, and it's the same company that's being contracted to tackle COVID in hospitals and sanitary environments for the National Health Service.
Yes, it is shocking. I mean, when it the scandal that I uncovered only kind of half came out. One side of it was exposed. It came out in the Telegraph, which was that the people using the equipment were getting lung damage from breathing the fumes. And they got compensated. They were a big case. What never came out really publicly was the fact the equipment didn't disinfect properly. I think, to be honest, the NHS rather covered it up because they could get blamed for not having tested the equipment properly. So it's very hard to get any traction on that one. But nonetheless, there was a public scandal around the company as a result of me speaking out. But the company then changed its name. They used to be called Specialist Hygiene Solutions. Soon as the scandal blew up, they changed their name to Innovia. Same people running it. Yeah, and you see this a lot in brethren companies. They get involved in sort of murky, dodgy stuff, and then suddenly they take voluntary receivership, and then you'll find the same directors suddenly have a new company doing something different. Yeah, they're like snakes.
Rebrand.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it works. Yeah.
And what is also shocking about that is that it's NHS workers using the equipment that are being affected by the equipment. And then it's also the NHS that is having to compensate these people for getting sick using the equipment because the company never paid out any money in any repercussion money, I suppose.
Exactly. I mean, that's the tragic thing about it, that although it was entirely the company's fault for not producing, for misleading information, the contracts with the NHS have got these kind of weasel words somewhere in the small print that somehow meant it was actually the NHS who was paying out the compensation, not the company whose equipment it was, which is also maybe another reason why the NHS were reluctant to pursue the sort of failure to disinfect, because it would just mean the NHS facing a load of, class action lawsuits from people who had got infections in hospitals, and they would never be able to actually pin it back on the people who were pocketing the money.
And the NHS is kind of on its knees as it is, especially after the pandemic. And so I can see why the decision not to pursue that was made. But what I don't understand is how that same company is then awarded one of these big contracts. And that's where I'm kind of thinking about Swami Nityananda, who is a fugitive on the run, who is outlawed with arrest warrants out because of human trafficking and child sexual abuse, who has representatives being invited into the Houses of Parliament, into the United Nations, to be part of talks about future policies and shaping the way that, and so again, like, where are these political ties? How are people being able to, because this is public information, any politician, anyone involved in any of these things can look at the representatives who are coming and realize that there is a direct association. They are representing this cult leader who is on the run for these crimes. So the same sort of thing with this contract. If even part of the scandal has come out from 2015, it's common knowledge or public knowledge, or it's, there's a vetting that can be done.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, it's frustrating.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's hugely frustrating. Yeah.
It's so hard, especially when like human lives are at stake, right? When it's actually like, that's the part that I don't get. And that's why I think it's just so important for everybody, everywhere, in any way. They've got to learn how to stand up and use their voice, and however you can.
And when companies are being awarded billions of dollars in contracts, that money is then going towards the systemic child abuse or the systemic abuse of children. So it's one thing, awarding a dangerous religious group a load of money to carry out potentially corrupt and dangerous work. It's another thing to consider that money is sustaining a dangerous religious group who are covering up historical abuse, sexual abuse of children.
I mean, one thing the Brethren use is, partly again, because we've spoken about their kind of dress regulations and their rules. I mean, Brethren, men, I suppose, tend to dress very smartly. They don't have any tattoos. They don't have any piercings. They always have short hair and a side parting. They always look very neat and tidy. and they're kind of trained to present themselves well and always polish their shoes. And so when your brethren businesses have got this very squeaky clean professional look about them, and so you just don't think, well, maybe there's actually massive blatant lies in their very professional looking advertising literature. I mean, they don't look like your skanky used car salesman, right? Or even smell like him, but it's the perfect cover. I mean, you know, when there's a scandal, you know, a sex scandal in the village, it's the vicar isn't the first person you think of as you know, sneaking around at night. It is the perfect cover. They all look very clean and professional, and so people believe them. They got this huge, utterly unwarranted credibility. And they use that to their advantage.
It's a very well-oiled machine, right?
Oh,
it's,
yes.
They over the time, it's become very well-oiled. And Bruce Hales, like I'll say this till I'm black and blue in the face. He knows what he is doing. He doesn't. There's his church is not a broken system, right? To the victims it is. But to him, he knows exactly what he is doing. He knows, oh yeah, he's got a very perfected machine that he's had time to look back and see what his dad was doing wrong and be able to perfect all of that and then give them, because, you know, after I left home, it was that following year when there was a group of us that left, I think there's people leaving all over, but in Maple Creek, there was a group of us in a span of however many years, we're all leaving. And after I left with the priest's granddaughter, and then that following year, everybody got moved to homeschooling, right? And he has a way of maneuvering his vehicle to suit the needs of those inside, but yet glossing it on the outside. So we found out, I mean, my mom was trying to get me to go back and like, oh, Cheryl, Bruce Hales he's just so good. I wasn't in when Bruce Hales took over. I was in when his dad was in. And she would tell me all the things that they got to do. And you sit back and you look at it now, 10 years later, or however many years later, and he just opened up all these candy shops filled with music and things that nobody had ever been able to do before, yet tighten down the hatches everywhere else, right? He's got them so locked in there that it takes people like Richard and myself and Carmen and everybody who's been coming forward to literally be throwing these dynamite truth bombs at their place so that they can realize that, hey, no, he's just turned on a party for you inside there while he's turning this into the most corrupt enterprise ever.
The things that shocked me about the Plymouth Brethren in listening to both of you and doing some independent research is the conservative aesthetic of the group is quickly tarnished when you realize that there's a lot of drugs involved, there's a lot of moving around of certain products, and I know that this is something that you've had personal experience with, Cheryl, so I wondered if you could just tell the listeners about the type of corrupt activity that takes place within the Plymouth Brethren, even though it positions itself to be quite clean and quite conservative and godlike.
Do you know, this brings me back to, I hadn't spoken to my parents for quite a few years. And I had been talking with an ex-member and she was telling me about some drug use that was happening in a locality of people that were inside and they witnessed, they were part of it. They had, you know, and I took a chance and I called my parents up and one of my brothers, if not both of them, were on the phone. And that's when I first told them about what had happened to me. I was trying to tell them that what they believe is happening in the world is happening inside there. And they would have nothing to do with it. It was a very heated discussion until I finally just blurted out that like Ellen had raped me. And so getting back to the corruption, just from what I experienced, I've sat back now at 48 and you write this out, you put it down, you're trying to think of what he was a part of and what he hands his hands into. And the priest that took over, the original priest who had it out for our family and was pushing me out because he knew what was happening with me. I mean, he'd got called to the house one time when Ellen was really hurting me, and his wife obviously got scared, called her brother, came over. So yeah, I mean, I was a transporter for drugs to places. I remember one time being taken into it was the one and only time that I was taken into this mobile home, and I had to go in by myself. Normally my lady driver or somebody met with them, and I was transferred over. And this one specific time, I was carrying a backpack, and she told me that I had to be very brave, and I had to go up to this house, and I had to go in by myself. And I remember sitting on their couch, and he opened up the backpack. And I mean, we were a very poor family. It's some images just stick with you. I couldn't believe the stack of money that came out of this backpack. And in me, however old I was young. I just remember looking at it like, just being wowed at, like, I didn't know money could be like that. I didn't know that money was like that. You know? So I'm like, honestly, Casey, I sit back many, many times in the middle of the night when I can't sleep and be like, what the hell did even just the Maple Creek group have their hands in with? I mean, I don't talk about this on a lot of podcasts, and I'm not going to go into it, but I was taken to this huge Quonset that was a whole nother group of people that, I mean, the shit that happened inside there, I mean, I don't know, maybe when I'm 90, I'll get the courage up to write about it. But like, my heart breaks just talking about it, but I just, like, I wish so bad that my parents and the people in there knew of the absolute evil that they have their hands into, and evil that they have little kids a part of. And I mean, I know I was not the only one with my perpetrator. I know I wasn't. Everything happened way too fast. Like, you look back and you reflect and you're like, wow, like, no, there was no, like, the grooming happened fast. It was like he knew what he was doing, you know?
And with the type of isolation that's replicated in that way around the world, it probably goes without saying that there are other individuals who are experiencing the same levels of abuse, and either believe that it's normal, believe that it's love, believe that that's what they should continue doing, or cannot think of a way to escape from that environment, because everything that they've ever known and will ever know, unless they find a way to escape, is the Plymouth Brethren. And that's the really heartbreaking part about all of this. Although it is important to focus on both of your stories, in terms of you both being here now on the outside, speaking out against the Plymouth Brethren. You mentioned, Cheryl, you left when you were 17. Could you just talk the listeners through how and why that happened, why you finally just said, this is enough and I am leaving for good?
Yeah, so my perpetrator's the main perpetrator in everything that happened to me, his name is Ellen, and his brother-in-law and two other men kind of overtook Maple Creek. So they knocked out the elderly priest at that time, and they took it over, and they had it out for our family from day one, right? It was a long-standing feud between my grandpa and his dad. Like, it was just this long-standing feud that happened. They had more money. I honestly don't know what it was about, but it was just this feud that was there. So when I started getting of age, so I would say like 12, 13, you start looking outside the window and, finding boys fancy. The priestly visits just really started happening. They started with my dad. So my dad would be taken away on priestly visits, and they would come and pick him up, and he'd be gone for hours and hours. And he'd come back and he was so silent, rarely talking to us after them for like weeks. And there was this one time he came back, and my mom's name is Barb, and he was like, Barb, I need the phone bills. I need the phone bills. Barb, I need the phone bills. And I have to say that was probably my first real light bulb that really hit with me of like, why are you kidding me? Like the phone bills? And every fight that I had up until right before I left was, I always threw that in their face of like, why, like, tell me about the phone bills. What really got me to leave was we were having this succession of priestly visits all the time over special friendships. So you're not allowed to have special friends in there. So if you're seen hanging out with one person more like very frequently, you would get a priestly visit, right? Because that's considered a special friendship. Our house was a block away from the high school. Everybody hung out at it. I mean, we were the rebels. We were the rebels, and we hung out with the same group of people all the time. Anyhow, we had this one specific priestly visit that happened before church. Normally they happened after, and they came, and we had to set up our chairs in a specific way so that we had 4 chairs they were facing each other, and the priest sat on one side and our family had to sit on the other. And my mom actually stood up and challenged them, and in that moment got us shut up. So it's the first form of communication. It was like they shut us up immediately, because that showed that my dad wasn't the head of the household, that my mom was. And it freaked our whole family out. I mean, we were all crying, and it's like 20-30 minutes into us crying and pleading to come back, they finally unshut us up, and we're like, okay, we can go to meeting now. So we had to walk into meeting like 20-30 minutes late. Everybody knows what's going on, because here's our family walking in with the priest. And at this point, it was the lowest form of manipulation. I was livid. I was done. I knew I had to go to school the next day. I had to face all these people that go to there was brethren, children that I went to school with. You'd be the gossip, right? You're going to be the talk of their subjects. And that next morning before school, the head leader priest, who was kicked out, he kind of demoted, he showed up on our doorstep, and he was in tears. And he said, like, I am so sorry for what happened last night. He said, but my hands are tied. And it was in that moment, I was done. I was like, but for me, done was, I was going home in spirit. I was going to end my life. I was done. I was like, there was no way I was subjecting myself to any more of this abuse. I had stayed. So Ellen had programmed me very well, and everything that I was doing was helping my dad. So that was programmed very early. I mean, it's something that I'm trying to deprogram right now in therapy, to be able to really let go of the grief I have for my parents, right? Is because I'm so stuck to them from such an early age of like, everything that I had to do was my responsibility. So I own a lot of this responsibility that happened to me. And I mean, in this last week, it's just been really, really, the dial's been turned up to like 100%. And it took something like that for me to realize that I didn't have to stay and protect my dad anymore, that I could go home. And I was going home. I was going off the planet. I went to school that day, and I had in English class, I wrote a suicide poem. I went out and on my paper route, my mom found it, and she approached me, and it made me freeze, because I didn't have a backup plan in that moment, right? So it took me a whole other year to befriend anybody else who was looking to leave, right? And so that happened to me, that priest's granddaughter that I ended up leaving with, and her and I had made plans, got an apartment, and it was the librarian at the elementary school that helped us get together. I left, like literally left with nothing. And I had never been able to leave the house on my own before. And that morning, it was September 12th of 1992. That morning, I put on my scarf with its poke out of it, which I'd never done before. And I looked at my mom, and I said to her, I said, can I go to the pharmacy for some contact solution? And she said, yes. And I was shocked. I was expecting this big, huge fight, because I'd never been allowed to just go downtown by myself without a sister or something like that. And that day we left.
Do you think that she knew that that's what you were doing?
I sit back. I actually just talked about this in therapy on Monday night. And if she didn't consciously know about it, her heart knew. I believe my mom's heart knew that there was no way that I could heal what I needed to heal in there. And there wasn't, right? I would have ended up dead no matter what, right? There was no way that I would have been able to survive in there. I know my mom knew what was happening to me. And I think it's probably one of the hardest things that I struggle with when this flares up for me. Because I'm a mother of 3 kids, right? And I try and tell myself, I know she's brainwashed and all those things, but I guess most of my fuel for this fire comes to be able to bring that mothering roar back into those females that are inside that church. And it's probably why I get so passionate on some of the podcasts, is because I just want to wake that roar up inside them, to be like, don't be so freaking submissive to the point where your child, like, I mean, I had someone witness me being picked up in between meetings on a Sunday, and my mom crumbling to the floor, crying to this other person, this mom, saying that she thought that was the day I was going to be sold. Like, and it explains to me, like, you just look back and you reflect and you're like, oh, that's why my mom was like this. That's why my mom was like that. That's why my mom was like this. That's why my mom never said about this. All these things start kind of compiling together. But I just, because I miss her. I miss them so badly that she had a moment in time when she stood up that I know that it existed in her. But these, pardon my French, these fucking assholes just stripped that from her. Like, that's such a, like, I know listeners are sitting here listening to that, but that's literally, they denied my mother the action of taking care of somebody who is being so brutally abused. That is a crime you can't even put on paper. That's not a crime that you can even sit down and try and explain after you die, right? Like, how do you take a crime like that and try and balance that? You know what I mean? And it just, so instead of me getting stuck in it all, I just use it to fuel me to bring this change, even though I'm dying still inside, right? So it's hard. It is very hard for me to be able to be out in the public's eye, listening to these stories, opening this book all the time. But at the same time, it really makes me not become compliant to my own healing that I have to do. Because it is very easy. It's very easy in our world to be busy, to take care of other people, to do all these things and put your own healing to the side. And I'll probably heal this till I'm 90 years old, right? It's just one of those things. It's finding how to ride it, though, so that it doesn't consume you.
I wonder if your mum had a realization that day that if she didn't let you go, she would have lost you, not just spiritually, but physically as well. If you had that strong suicidal ideation. And it is hard when you have your own kids and you have your own young children and you hear stories that are really harrowing and difficult. And you realize that there are people that they're not just saying, you know, I know someone that this has happened to, they're saying this has happened to me. And you wonder how people can let that happen. And it's really difficult to go through that journey of compassion and understanding and education when there is always that small part in the back of your mind that says, would I ever let that happen to my own children? But it's all the hypotheticals. And Chris Shelton once said to me that you can't live your life in hypotheticals, but that is part of human nature, to have that hindsight and think about those things. But it's torturous, and the grief that you're experiencing in losing that relationship with your parents is something that is spoken about quite often on the podcast, and the grief for spirituality and faith, and loss of community and friendships, and all of the good things that people experienced when they were in these abusive environments, because it also took me a long time to realize that not 100% of cultic experiences are going to be negative. Some parts will be positive and will shape who you are, and you will carry them through with you through life. And there'll be parts of you that you've kept with you, and parts that you've left behind and divorced from. And I just thank you so much, Cheryl, for sharing those difficult parts of your experiences with us today. Richard, you mentioned that you were married when you were in the PBCC. Was this a marriage that came to an end when you decided that you were going to walk away for good, or was it something that you tried to maintain after you left?
No, it was something that I left when I walked away for good. I mean, I've got 5 children in there. They're all in their 20s now, that I haven't communicated with since I walked out. And it's quite hard for people who haven't had the experience to understand how the cult, the religion, their doctrines, they attack natural relationships, because the very core of their doctrine is that your connection to the church is more important than your connection to your natural relatives. I mean, they quite openly talk about it. They say, before you can get married, you've got to be married to the church. You're married to the church first, and your children belong to the church. You know, everything belongs to the church. You know, they kind of allow natural families to exist, but you have to sign over all your rights. And my ex-wife, I mean, she was a good person and a kind person, but she was so deeply indoctrinated that it wasn't even worth starting that conversation with her. Plymouth Brethren, I believe, have a particularly deep indoctrination, because it's indoctrination from birth. People who've been converted into a cult have a previous existence and a previous worldview that they will typically revert to once everything falls to bits for them. But brethren don't have anything else. There's nothing to revert to. There's no other experience. Their ideas have never been challenged. And there's also a very, very strong sort of thread of doctrine in the Brethren that says it's terribly evil and wicked to doubt or to oppose anything that the Brethren say. I mean, we heard just recently that Bruce Hales, the supreme leader, has recently said that there's 3 levels in hell. The first level is just for your average common or garden sinner. The next level is for people like Hitler and Mussolini and, you know, all these mass murderers. And then the very lowest level in hell is for people who oppose the testimony. In other words, me and Cheryl, you know, we're right at the bottom level. And that's the mentality. And the effect is that, you know, if I was to have kind of said to my wife, well, you know, do you think this is right? That's right. It would have produced a massive kind of opposite reaction. It would have driven her further into the arms of the cult. The first thing that would have happened is that she would have phoned the priest and said, my husband said this, and he's, you know, he's losing his way and the devil's getting at him. And it's an impossibility. People have to come to their own convictions. You can't convert anyone out of it. And usually, you know, people get out by 2. I mean, there's kind of 3 ways that people get out. There's a very interesting minority of people who, for some reason, just never get indoctrinated. They come up as children, they never believe any of this crap, and as soon as they're old enough, they go. And that they're usually very kind of extrovert and outspoken people, and you know, they come out and they're great characters because they've just got this self-confidence that they never actually got. And you know, I don't know how they do it, but you know, they're a minority. Then there are people who are kicked out. These are people who've inadvertently said something wrong, done the wrong thing, got caught up in something, and they're kicked out and they didn't want to leave, but you know, it's church discipline. And then there's people like, I suppose Cheryl's probably in this category and I am, where just by the circumstances you get so mistreated and you see so much crap that it finally erodes away all that brainwashing, and you finally, you know, at a late age in my case, realize that it's just a load of horse shit. But it takes an awful lot of beating to beat it out of you.
And sometimes a lifetime, as Cheryl said, sometimes that healing and that kind of deconstruction will be something that people will do for the rest of their lives.
Oh yeah.
The thing that you mentioned about the indoctrination from birth, what is really prevalent with this particular group is the 7th, 8th generation that are coming through, because then you don't even have the stories of your parents or your grandparents who were like, oh, when I lived in the world, or, you know, when before our family joined the Brethren. There aren't even any of those stories anymore. It is just everybody
Yep.
has been in. Everybody that's alive that you know has been in. You'd have to go back, you know, decades and decades to find people who have stories of not being in the Brethren. And then if you're going back that far, you're probably like, well, they were in the Seventh-day Adventists, and then they decided to move
Yeah.
over to the Brethren, and they were allowed in.
Yeah, it's
So
exactly true. Yeah. I mean, my grandparents' stories were all about the times they met the great men. You know, they met James Taylor Sr., you know, and he stayed at my parents' house. And then there's, you know, all their stories are Brethren stories. It's a whole mythology, you know.
So you finally decided, Richard, that you were done in 2015, but that was not even 10 years ago. So I imagine that you were slowly coming around to the idea that maybe it wasn't for you anyway.
Yeah, it was a process. I mean, you build up all these doubts, you know, things happen, but you're very well trained in the Brethren to control your thoughts, control what you think. You know,
Natural thinking.
yeah,
No
yeah.
natural thinking.
And of course, you're told God can read and see all your thoughts, so you don't even dare think the bad thoughts. You know, there's no privacy in the Brethren. They see inside your skull. And so you tend to kind of accumulate all these in a sealed box in the back of your mind, and you don't think about them because they're uncomfortable, and you're worried that if you know, you're taught again and again in the Brethren that just one doubt is cyanide. You know, it only takes 1% cyanide to kill you. So if you allow one tiny doubt in, it's going to kill you. So you accumulate all this stuff somewhere in the back of your head and never dare think about it. And then one day, you know, you can blow up a balloon, eventually it goes pop and all this stuff comes out, and it just overwhelms you. You suddenly realize that all those bad experiences you had, you can't just explain them away anymore. You know, this really is a broken system. This really is a load of crap. So yeah, for me, it was like this cumulative process of, you know, decades of mistreatment. And you know, this scandal I came across. I think the thing about the scandal that I uncovered, and because it involved the very top hierarchy of the church, I suddenly realized that the rot came from the top. I mean, I'd seen a lot of crap things in the Brethren, but I always assumed that the leadership was good and perfect, and that all these bad things were kind of dirt soaking up from below, and it was only the kind of bottom ranks of the Brethren where this crap happened. And if only Mr. Hales was here, he would sort it all out. And then suddenly that whole worldview gets flipped completely upside down, and you realize that all the crap and corruption is coming down from the top, and actually the kind of the grassroots Brethren are the best of a bad lot. And it was that, you know, inversion of what I'd always believed that was the tipping point.
It's the cult tactics of social proofing, and then when you do decide that, oh, actually, you know, I think I'm going to speak out, then you've got leadership probably saying, you know, all of the things that we told you about these people, that this is what happens. when you let the devil in, or this is what happens when you go out into the world. And you know, what you said about the doctrine over self, or the doctrine over blood, and separating natural families from one another. It's confirmation. It's used to confirm what the church has always said, what the teachings have always said, to divide you further. And as you said, drive like family members like your wife further into the arms of the group. It's an impossible situation, and people have to tread that line for years of, you know, like, do I just walk away, and then, you know, do I risk the relationship with my wife and my children? It's so much more. And actually, I was reading a Twitter thread today of former cult members who were saying, you know, one of the things that is the hardest for me to hear is, why didn't you just leave? And this is a perfect example of why people can't just leave. Cheryl, could you just tell the listeners before we finish up today, leaving at 17, the final straw, all of the things that accumulated for you, saying, I am going to the pharmacy and I'm never coming home. How did you manage with nothing, no possessions, no family? You mentioned a librarian. Shout out to that person, because we all need those heroes in our lives. I just wondered if you could let us know what that journey looked like for you.
So I left with like $300 in my bank. I'd had a paper out. You made little bits of money there. And I thought I wasn't going to have to work for a while, right? So, I mean, the concept of finances and money, and when you actually get out to the real world, well, within days, I knew I needed to find a job. But we slept on the floor her and I slept on the floor for a while, until the librarian also, she was the landlord of this apartment building, until she realized that we didn't have a bed. And so she was associated with Salvation Army, and she got us some pots and pans, and she got us a bed. My clothes I had pushed out the window the night before to my cousin, who was already out, and he had a little bit too much to drink. He put them up against his truck and only put in the last bag, and the other two I didn't get. So I was without clothing too. But, you know, I had to learn very fast how to try and learn how to socialize. I'm not going to lie. I used alcohol to socialize. Alcohol was my crutch on how to get over the nerves of having to talk to other people and to assimilate this whole new world. So that was a really huge crutch for me, until my husband came along a couple of years later. And I still struggled with it for quite a bit in our marriage, and he was the one that really helped me pull my head out of that crutch. But it was as much fun as it was, because you're 17, right? And I mean, the night we left, we were on our bikes, you know, in my skirt, riding around. It's probably midnight, just like exploring in the dark, like what this life was going to look like. It was scary. It was really scary. But at the same time, there was this excitement of this newfound freedom, right? I mean, my biggest thing I tell people is, you cannot put a price on taking that leap into freedom, right? And in this case, freedom comes with consequences, right? You still carry the grief of not having your family. As much as Mr. Hales is telling everybody right now that we deteriorate very fast after we leave, no, it is the opposite. When you gain your freedom, you take ownership of your life. You take ownership for your health and for your mental well-being. And so, yes, it is a lot of work, but I am in control of me, right? I am the one that I have to go to bed with at the end of the day. I'm the one that's in my head. I'm the one that's in my heart. And so healing happens inside freedom. And that is always my biggest message that I tell people, is that sometimes you just have to take that leap, and you have to trust. You just have to trust that everything is going to be there for you, because it is. I mean, I haven't heard of really horrible stories of people leaving and being yes, there's people sleeping in cars, and yes, there's all these things, but eventually you find your way, right? You do find your way. I don't regret. I would do it all over again, 100%. I mean, my bar days were the funnest days I've ever had. I mean, it was just nice to get out and just dance and let it go, you know?
But you have a podcast now, Cheryl. Isn't that the most fun?
Yeah, that's true.
So, Richard, you've mentioned that you're working on a memoir. You have some top secret files that you're sitting on. What are your immediate plans in terms of activism? 55,000 members. I know there's going to be pockets of people that we could never, ever reach. But with the work that you're doing, there's a chance that in our lifetime, this group might not really exist.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
definitely.
it's not an impossible thought, I don't think.
No, I mean, they are cults are fragile, and the biggest threat ever to their existence is the internet, because their whole existence depends on controlling people's communications and access to information, and it's never ever been easier to actually break through that barrier. So yeah, I think they're fragile, and they're also fragile because it's a one-man band. It all hangs on the leader. If he wakes up and has a bad day, he can screw it all up. You know, he could lose the whole thing in an hour if he says the wrong thing. It's another unique thing about the Brethren is it all hangs on one man. Jehovah's Witnesses have got a sort of a governing committee, which, you know, they're not going to suddenly do something extreme because they've all got to come to a consensus about it. Brethren, it's Bruce Hales's private club.
And dictators do topple.
Oh, they do.
Yes.
Yeah, no, they're fragile. And you know, if we help one person to escape, it's been worthwhile. I don't have ambitions to bring the whole thing down. What I would like to see, I mean, what I think is entirely achievable is making enough publicity about their, you know, extremely unpleasant and damaging practices that their taxation status is threatened. Yeah. They will do anything for money, and if they had to choose between either losing their charitable status or giving up on their separation excommunication doctrine, they would throw the doctrine in the bin. And you know, that's entirely achievable. Yeah.
Canada is really at the forefront of making some of those changes with big religious groups as well, as far as my understanding goes.
Not really. I mean, Norway has just kind of kicked the Jehovah's Witnesses out of their financial status. There was a court case in Belgium where, again, Jehovah's Witnesses were prosecuted for the shunning doctrine. I mean, it's coming. The world is getting increasingly secular, and the kind of idea that governments, you know, the parliament starts the day with a prayer, and you've got a bunch of bishops in the House of Lords just because they're bishops. I mean, this is all looking increasingly Harry Potter, isn't it? And you know, the tide is not going in the Brethren's favor. So, you know, I think we're at a point in time where we, you know, a few people with a podcast can really make a big difference.
Absolutely, especially when it's individuals' personal experiences and survivor testimony. Again, it's not, you know, it's not me researching from websites and court cases. It's you people, your stories, you're coming forward and saying, this is what happened to me. It's, you know, it's not something that needs to be quantified. It's something that is reality, and it was my reality. I know that Canada have a microscope on the Mormon church at the moment in terms of finances.
Yeah.
So hopefully if we're looking at tax exemption status, or churches with the tax exemption status, there's a chance that more dangerous practices could come under the microscope. So we have our fingers crossed for that.
Yep.
To finish up, Cheryl, could you please tell the listeners the name of your podcast and where they can find it, and also any other websites or social media pages and platforms that people can reach out to if they'd like to get in touch?
Yeah, so our podcast is called Get a Life Podcast. We're on YouTube. We're also on Anchor that ships it out to, you know, all the other platforms. And by the time this airs, there will be a website that is up and going, and we most likely should have our charity status. We should be, by the time this airs, we should have our charity status, and we also have that all up and going. And that website is the Olive Leaf Network. And so it is a global website that has all the different countries on it that you'll be able to contact. People from inside can contact us. There's a lot of resources on there. And yeah, so that's launching here right away for New Zealand. Yeah, New Zealand. Yeah, it's New Zealand that's going. And then ours, as soon as our charity status comes in, it will be up and running. Yeah,
that's absolutely fantastic. Richard, do you have any last words for anybody who might be listening from the inside today, in terms of things that you might say to somebody if you had the opportunity to talk to a Plymouth Brethren member?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, to start with, do not believe all the lies and the stories that everyone who leaves goes down the drain. Those of us who've left would never ever go back. You know, our only regrets is that we wasted so much time in there. What I would say to you is, what you need to be scared of if you stay in the Brethren is that you come to your deathbed and realize you had never actually lived.
Yeah.
Very well said. I feel like that must be something you've said before, Richard, because that just kind of rolled off the tongue. Well, thank you both so much for coming to share your stories today. It's similar to why I spoke to two people called Dan and Erica about their experiences in KwaZulu-Ubuntu, which I've mentioned in this episode. And Dan's approach is very clinical and is very, sort of talks about the history of things. And then Erica is the person that is like she's the warrior. She's the person that's like, I'm going to save everybody. I'm going to get all of the kids out. And she's really emotional, and she's passionate, and she's beautiful. I feel that dynamic between the two of you here, and you're covering all of the ground with both of those approaches. And I think it's absolutely incredible the work that you're doing, and the changes that you have already made to people's lives, to each other, to yourselves, and all of the people that you'll be able to reach through this work that you're doing as well. Thank you both so much for your time today.
I'm having us on.
I'm really excited. I'm excited to see where you'll be when this episode airs, and from a year from now as well. Maybe we'll have to have a little catch-up update when things really start moving. So thank you both so much.
Yep. You're very welcome.
Yep.
Both take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.